So your wife, in her classic fashion, today, we're standing outside, and she's like, "You want to just go smoke?" And I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "I knew she was having a rough day."
Yeah.
I was like, "Yeah." So like, we're standing outside, and one of the IT guys is like walking in. He's like, "You having a rough day?" And she goes, "Yeah." She's like, "It's my dad's birthday, and he died." Just straight in his face, and he's like, and she did it just to fuck with him.
Yeah.
And she's like,
Thank you.
"Yeah, he's dead now." And she just kept digging it deeper. And I'm just like, "You're such a fucking dick, man."
We were out running errands, and we were driving in the car and had my mother on speakerphone.
She told me this.
And my mom was like, "So who else coming to dinner?" And Caitlin, without missing a beat, goes like, "Well, my mom and dad won't be there."
It's funny. I told her, I was like, you deal with your grief very similar to the way a lot of me and my friends do.
That's how I
with
deal with
like
it.
a reverent humor,
Yeah.
right? And I was like, and believe it or not, it got us in a tangent because we started talking about my parents, right? Now, as you guys all know, I lost my parents very young, right? Like my dad died when I was 11. My mom died when I was 20. Like I was very, very young.
Well, the first dad kind of like just dipped, didn't he?
Well, that's the guy who died. Yeah.
I mean, so, I mean,
Well, yeah, I wasn't really busted up about it. True. Right? But very
that
true.
9-year cigarette trip probably.
Right. It's like, I met him once when I was 8, and then he dropped when I was 11. So yeah, like I went to school that morning. I was like, okay. Like, I remember it was funny. I remember like my 4th grade teacher pulled me out in the hallway, and she was like, "Your mom called and told me what happened. Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah." Can I go back to the quiz? I was like,
You have to know somebody to miss them.
yeah, right. Like I had no frame of reference, man. I didn't know this person. Right?
Cut into my recess time.
Yeah, right. Like you're
I've
fucking
had
me
family
up.
members die, and I was more broken up when Alan Rickman passed.
Not Snape, no. Fucking Severus. So like, but I started talking to Caitlin about this, and I was like, it's funny, like, without sounding like religious and the whole everything happens for a reason, I do think that dealing with the loss of my parents at such a young age better prepared me for combat, and being able to go into situations that dealt with death with a clearer mind.
Well, you're correct, but I'm not going to bore the audience with the actual reference on why. Because you did end up with a skill set that's legit.
Yeah.
So
it makes sense to me though. Like I feel like I handled it better, which in turn made me a better Marine, a better leader.
So the number one cause of
that.
PTSD is actually what's known as compartmental fracture.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is through life, you build a logic path on how to deal with things. And it starts with little things when you're young. Like, that's hot, don't touch it. Things like that. These build logic paths.
I'm still trying to figure that out sometimes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They build
Every time I
logic
take
paths.
a bite of food, I'm like, oh fuck.
So your stressors start small. You start learning how to deal with those stressors.
Yeah.
So you have built-in essentially muscle memory of how your brain compartmentalizes and then adds logic to legitimate outcome.
Sure.
Then when catastrophe happens, you end up with what's known as compartmental fracture because you don't know what to do with it. So instead of having this super handy filing cabinet of this is where everything goes so that I can make sense of it, it all ends up all over the place.
Sure.
And that's what actually is the leading cause of PTSD, which leads to depression and all this. It's literally you don't know what to do with the information. So since you aren't able to compartmentalize it in a correct and logical pattern, you have these triggers that will then pull that information and it throws you into a non-logic path. And that's what causes PTSD triggering. It's because you're in fractured logic path.
Makes
so you
sense.
don't know how to walk through it. But when you're young and you're still building all those pathways and you suffer trauma, you've now built a habit, a muscle memory of how to compartmentalize correctly that trauma. And that's the number one thing that I have an issue with pharmaceutical solutions that we handle with the veteran community.
You know what I have a problem with? This is the first time I've ever heard that,
and it makes sense.
Yeah, it's
No
infuriating.
one's
isn't it?
ever fucking
And
told us
I've been in
this.
the army for 10 years and,
this
I've
is-
been out for fucking 15.
and this is what
This is
infuriates
literally
me.
the first time I'm hearing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So this is one of the biggest issues
Thanks,
with,
VA.
with how the VA actually handles it is because we go,
'Cause they throw meds at everything, man.
but because
Like,
they solve it all with pharmaceutical psychology.
Yeah.
Let's not explain it to somebody. Let's fucking.
And the thing
You're
is,
fine here.
and the thing is that explaining like that, especially with the military community, is we are trained in very logical A to B situations. So it's A to B, B to C, C to D.
yeah.
And we train that way because it builds mental muscle memory. It's not just the muscle memory. You can break it down to BRM. BRM is a sequence. And
Basic rifle marksmanship.
for those of you that don't know it, yes. I forget that we have
I got
actually
you.
quite a few
I got
civilians. So,
I got you.
but if you think about
That's an army
BRM,
term, man. I don't know what the fuck you were talking
so
about.
basic rifle marksmanship, you guys probably have an equivalent term.
Probably.
But you do that so much that if we sat here, we've been out for a while, but if we sat here and thought about it, we could go through the whole sequence of everything that has to do with basic rifle marksmanship.
Sure.
Solid cheek weld, controlling your breathing, trigger squeeze, all of that kind of stuff. But when you do it long enough, you're not thinking about every single one of those steps. It becomes muscle memory. It's a sequential thought process that's now become embedded. So, but we train for combat that way, but then we do not train ourselves for post-combat trauma in the same fashion. And we've already built that training in. Instead, on the back end, we go like, here's a pill and a 30% check, you're fine.
Yeah.
And it's like, they're not fine. And it can be fixed. Like,
Yeah.
so, but it's fractured. It's fractured logic. It's fractured compartmentalization.